So, quite honestly, at this moment in time, I am really disappointed in Simon Jenkins. Obviously, people know his reputation over at The Guardian. He's like the, I don't know, closest I'd say they've got to um, many of like the conservative positions on a lot of things. Likes to, write a lot of like, the really sort of, controversial opinions type of thing. But what we've seen here, and if you've ever seen any of my videos talking about Ukraine or talking about, people making criticisms of Ukraine where we've like responded to them, you've seen this all before. You've seen this all before, unfortunately. People like Simon Jenkins keep on asking these questions, and they seem to just ignore. Whenever they ask these questions, they do get answers. Now, I actually found this because I actually noticed the letter responses to Simon Jenkins that it seemed to a lot of people really respond to. So it is really good that there has been definitely some pushback by at least the readership from The Guardian. But I want to go over this because once again, we are seeing people give the exact same criticisms of Ukraine and, oh, they just want this war to be over. They want it to be finished. But they keep on asking the same questions. And yet, bear in mind, not just, people like me, but I'm small. I'm really tiny in comparison to a lot of other people out there. And I doubt Simon Jenkins will ever see this video. I'm not that big head enough to think that he ever will. But there are other people out there who have addressed his criticisms multiple times about the worries about the Ukrainians, about why they are fighting and why some of the stuff he is saying, is going to have consequences later down the line that he himself does not seem to really want to admit. But we're going to go to this again anyway, because I think it's well worth going over, because I do really think there should be, pushback against some of this type of stuff that Simon Jenkins is saying. So we're going to go over to this, like I say, in The Guardian. But before we do that, please do remember to click the like, the share, and of course the like button. And of course, down below, there's the Patreon page. There's the Buy Me Coffee link where you can, well, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. So this obviously was from The Guardian by Simon Jenkins with the title of "It's worrying to see the Prime Minister cheerleading for war. Will Ukraine turn into Starmer's Iraq?" No, it won't. But let's see what Simon Jenkins has to say about this. So, when Keir Starmer entered Downing Street, a few foreign events were arranged to glamorize his arrival. He visited a NATO summit. Bear in mind, these weren't arranged. These NATO summit was already pre-planned. This NATO event was already happening. This had been in the diary years for months. So this wasn't magically happen. So I take issue at him saying that. There's, oh yeah, we'll just set this up because Starmer's been elected. No, didn't happen like that. So he visited a NATO summit and promised to spend more on defense. He pledged over $3 billion a year for Ukraine, apparently from his back pocket. And he was a little reckless. And he said that his talks with Joe Biden had happened at pace, and there was an alternative. There was it was all very attentive to detail. But he said something else. He said he wanted to see British missiles for Ukraine fired deep into Russian territory. And it sounded very macho, but it was not NATO policy. The Ministry of Defence and Downing Street also later clarified that this was not the current UK policy to allow such strikes. Bear in mind, I think we need to change that policy. It is becoming very, very clear that one of the things that we are doing is we are telling Ukraine to defend itself, but with one hand tied behind its back. And Russia knows this and is taking advantage of it, because all the sites that they are now using to attack Ukraine are well sort of within the range of these missiles that we are giving them, but we are not allowed or we are not allowing the Ukrainians to use the full capabilities of that equipment that we are giving them to be able to strike into Russian territory. We've recently just seen again a video that's doing the rounds on Twitter, etc., of a Ukrainian drone striking a Russian oil plant. Bear in mind, if we allow the Ukrainians missiles to start striking these plants, then the economy of Russia would be absolutely in dire straits, because the only thing that is keeping the Russian economy alive at the moment is selling oil like crazy to India and China at absolutely rock bottom prices. Is the only thing really that's keeping their territory, their whole war effort going. And I think we have to realize that if we want Ukraine to, go to the negotiating table in a very strong position, then I think we have to allow them to do this. But there you go. So, anyway, Simon continues. So leaders should obviously be aware of the unexpected. When Tony Blair entered number 10 in 1997, few could have even imagined that he would one day leave under the dark cloud marked Iraq. Britain's war in Iraq was very dressed up, like Starmer's missiles, as a veil to national security. What? Okay, once again, one of the big things and my big criticisms, we have seen throughout all the Ukraine stuff, is people comparing this to other crises. This is not like the Cuban Missile Crisis, because it's nothing like that whatsoever. This is nothing like Iraq whatsoever. How is this dressed up like Starmer's missiles? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. In reality, it was a very bombastic gesture intended to make Blair look good in America's eyes. Labour governments often feel the need to add trumpets and drums to their image. Anyway, ever since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, British politicians have used it as a stage on which to parade their toughness. Most ludicrously, Boris Johnson. Here's the thing: you can say that Boris Johnson used Ukraine to as a parade to make himself look very Churchillian. But the reality is, Boris Johnson, I think, understood the need to emphasize and rally Europe to help defend Ukraine. Boris Johnson did a lot of good in that. I know I'm praising Boris Johnson, but as I've said before, a broken clock can be right, it can be right twice a day. And this is one of the situations where Boris Johnson was right. And we know that obviously Boris Johnson had to be pushed into this by Ben Wallace. I know, etc., etc. We've talked about that before. But even very recently, I'll give Johnson credit once again. He went to America, to the RNC. Who did he meet? He met with Donald Trump. We know he had a meeting about Ukraine, and he told Trump, do not abandon Ukraine. You need to keep on supporting Ukraine. And I'll tell you what, good on him for doing that. Good on him for doing that. And I know it's Boris Johnson, but him doing that, I think, sends a very clear message from where the UK position is, and probably where certainly maybe the rest of NATO is. And like you say, if Trump gets in, who knows what's going to happen with Ukraine? That is a very, very worrying statement. And bear in mind, we'll see what Kamala Harris, or Kamala Harris. Sorry, I know I've basically been told I'm pronouncing a name wrong. It's like comma. So yeah, we'll see what her position is, but I think it would be very similar to Biden's, to be honest. I would like, again, America to go further, allowing these strikes. But again, we are sort of constrained because the thing they're using storm shadows. We need French permission as well. Macron hasn't given that either. So yeah, we'll see. So back to this. Most lunacy, Boris Johnson. So from the very start, Volodymyr Zelensky has collaborated. No, Volodymyr Zelensky hasn't collaborated. He has been very clear in exactly what he is doing, galvanizing Western leaders, making sure that Ukraine isn't forgotten about. And he has done a fantastic job in that. But anyway, the politicians are, of course, now going over the top, demanding total victory against Russia. One that they know is very implausible. Zelensky even embraces them very warmly and sends them the bill. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. I don't think I've ever heard, demanding total victory against Russia. Ukraine is not going to be marching into Moscow anytime soon. But for Ukraine to go into a negotiating position or, make Russia realize that it's not worth carrying on this war for the territory that they will gain, I think we should do everything we can to support Ukraine in that position by giving them the weapons they need to be able to do that. Because time and time and time again, Ukraine keeps on proving that if we give them the weapons, give them the stuff that they need, guess what? They can get the job done. Not only that, Jenkins here seems to be forgetting that throughout this war, Ukraine has recovered over 50% of the territory, I believe it is roughly something around that, of that Russia took in that initial invasion. So it's not like they haven't done anything. There's even big reports at the moment that there is not going to be a grand summer offensive by Putin this year because they've been suffering absolutely catastrophic losses. Why? Because of the weapons, arms, and ammunition that we have been giving them. Now, why is that? Because, as you may remember, there was the whole holdup of the Ukraine aid in America. Guess what's happened and started arriving on the front lines that has enabled Ukraine to inflict absolutely devastating losses on the Russians to a point where they cannot have even organize a summer offensive. Traditionally, when we would have seen big movements by Russia. Yeah. Anyway, so one condition that NATO has emphasized throughout this is that the Ukraine war be strictly defensive. Nothing should escalate beyond the country's borders. Vladimir Putin should not be provoked into a wider conflict. And this has meant that no NATO weapon should be used against targets deep inside Russia. This discipline has mercifully held. I think it should not be held, to be honest. I think we should be fully giving Ukraine permission to use weapons outside this because we have passed many a red line. Even allowing Ukraine to use such weapons, we were told by Vladimir Putin was an escalation. And what's happened? Nothing. We gave Western tanks. Ooh, escalation by Putin. Threatens nuclear war. Every single red line of what should be an escalation, Putin has failed to respond in any significant way. So, no, I think we should be letting, Ukraine use NATO weapons deep inside Russia. Because if they do start striking those oil terminals, those oil refineries, those oil depots, then Russia's economy goes down the toilet. That is something we should be seriously considering. If Simon Jenkins wants this war to end and he wants to end it quicker, then one of the things we should do is start allowing Ukraine to use those weapons to strike those terminals. Because without that oil money that is currently propping up Russia, they will find themselves going to an even worse position. And bear in mind, their economy at the moment is very not in a very good state either. So there you go. But anyway, let's continue this. So Starmer apparently now disagrees with it. He went to Washington last week, and he might have been ordering the Light Brigade into action against Russian guns. What? That does not make any sense. It's a brilliant turn of phrase by Simon Jenkins. I will say that, but no, nothing whatsoever. You're very implementing idea that we're ordering, troops into war against Russia, but that is not happening. But there you go. So back to this. So in fact, any change in NATO's weapon deployment does require a collective decision. But Zelensky has already welcomed the sight that a NATO member is now clearly happy to escalate the war. No, this will not be an escalation. And is, of course, ready to pay billions to do so. Some NATO members, such as France and Germany, have already allowed their non-NATO military and contributions to be used to strike far into Russia. The US has declined to allow this. Okay, so if France and Germany have been allowing some of their aid to strike into deep inside Russia, and bear in mind he's saying, oh yes, it's the non-NATO military aid. Really, what's the difference between, oh, this is NATO, but this is non-NATO? If France and Germany have allowed that to happen, to strike deep into Russia, why has there not been an escalation? Why has this not escalated into World War III? And at this point, all I can say is that Simon Jenkins is trying to fearmonger and scare people into this position that Starmer, I think, is now giving. And I think it is a very fair one that Starmer is now giving. I think we should allow this. I think this should be now allowed. Because if Ukraine really is to go to the negotiating table with a very strong hand, then that would be massively helped out if Russia's economy is just circling the toilet. And the one way you do that is if you start striking those oil terminals and its oil production capability, because that is what is keeping Russia afloat at the moment. You start striking those, you start interfering with that supply, things, the problems will start to occur in Russia's economy very, very quickly. So, this is already NATO's war. Okay. When 2 years ago, the initial Russian advance on Kiev was halted, it would have ended in some measly compromise, like that in Donbass of 2014. This has only continued because of NATO. Yeah, of course, this war is only continuing because of NATO. It has nothing to do with the fact that Ukraine managed to push back and halt, Russia in this. The Ukrainians were very, very adamant from the start that even if they did not receive NATO aid, they would keep on fighting because they knew what was at stake for their country. And bear in mind, oh yeah, you just want some measly compromise. That's also what the Ukrainians are scared of, because that measly compromise back in 2014 has led to the conflict that they are now fighting now. And one of the things they want is NATO membership, which will again protect them in the future so that Russia can't come back in and just start taking more of Ukraine piecemeal. We have been through this countless times, but this is still being said by these people, and they ignore when, the answer that I've just given has been ignored. Once again, completely ignoring the Ukrainian view, what the Ukrainians are saying. But, we've only been saying this for, 2 years now? But people keep on saying it. Anyway, it has only continued because of NATO, of which Ukraine is not a member, and has now offered to fund a Zelensky victory. So long as he wants to ready see tens of thousands of his conscripts die, the West was ready to pay. Um, that is incredibly disingenuous there. Oh, tens of thousands of his conscript dies. Why are those people dying, Simon? I find that really offensive to Ukrainians. I find that really offensive because those people who are dying right now on the front lines fighting against Russia are fighting so that they can keep their country free. But oh, guess that doesn't matter because, oh, tens of thousands of people die. Of course, this is war. People die. I can't believe we have to go that simple to that argument, but here we are. I did warn you at the beginning this was bad. So, as this awful war continues, even as it stalemates, the Western defense interests rather gather around like moths to a flame. NATO special forces now in Ukraine could mutate into regular ones, as happened very disastrously in Afghanistan. Putin, as long as he lasts, has the power to lay waste the great cities of Ukraine and unleash a minor nuclear trauma. NATO may be bludgeoned into escalating its response. So, once again, you are worried about escalation from, Putin upping the ante, but it's okay for him to do it, but it's not okay for NATO to do it to help defend Ukraine, to help end this war quicker, to help cause, such monumental Russian casualties that this summer, by the looks of it, from what some of the experts who have been watching this war for quite a while are saying, that Russia can't even carry out a summer offensive. I'm sorry, but this is someone not actually looking or listening to a lot of the experts who are out there who have been looking at this war since day one, even before that. He ain't interested in what they've got to say. So the non-military sanctions against Russia failed. If the non-military sanctions against Russia have failed, why is Russia's economy in such a state? Why is it having to rely on selling oil? In fact, every single barrel it can possibly get out of the ground at knockdown prices. Why is Russia having to resort to having a shadow oil fleet to try and get around these sanctions? Why are there shortages in Russia of things like eggs, poultry, salt? There's a ton of shortages going on in Russia. The economy is not as good as again, there's a lot of experts out there who have been keeping an eye on what is going on here. And Putin just keeps on, propping up the economy with anything he possibly can. And people have said it. Putin started off with a Jenga tower, and over time, he's had to, take out blocks to keep on putting on top. You cannot keep on doing that. Even Russia has actually said itself they cannot fight beyond 2025. So they've made a calculation that they can't do that. This is why, once again, the victory really does a lot rest on who's in the White House. So, yeah, but yeah, sorry, sanctions have really worked against Russia. They have really, really worked. If they hadn't, you'd see probably Simon maybe, using evidence of why Russia's economy has, quote, worked. So back to this. They have deterred no one and have solidified Putin. They actually have. They actually massively have. Because one of the things that China obviously would be very worried about now, part of the reason why they're watching this war, is, oh no, if we went to war to take Taiwan, we would get sanctioned. This would destroy our economy. So is it worth doing, going to war to take Taiwan? Is it going to be worth the massive economic hit we are going to take? And so far, China is looking at that, and the message is going out to China that it is not worth taking that. So again, to say that it has deterred no one, again, absolutely false. Solidified Putin. Well, he's had to surround himself with even more yes men. And even then, now taking, complete control of the war, this is Putin's failure. This hasn't solidified Putin. This has made his position even weaker. Anyway, they have punished Western economies. Yes, to some extent, but guess what? The Western economies have changed suppliers. They've changed things. We've recently seen, again, to talk about the wheat stuff going on. You've seen countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all the Baltic countries changing from Russian wheat to Ukrainian wheat because they would rather buy from the Ukrainians than from Russia, who has been dumping millions of extra tonnage onto their markets, thus causing a big grain crisis or a big fluctuation in the price of grain that we saw last year, that then Russian propaganda has tried to blame on Ukraine grain, which they've been, again, only way they can get this vast amount of grain out of the country to help fund their war effort is out to the ports on the Baltic Straits and the Baltic Sea, because that's the closest ports that can handle that amount of grain. And that's why you've seen, again, Polish farmers attack these trains wrongly, because that grain ain't being sold in Europe. It ain't being sold in Poland either. But, there you go. Anyway, so they have punished Western economies. They have coerced autocrats and cut Russia off from networks of persuasion or even contact. Yeah, it certainly cut Russia off from a lot of networks that have sort of really damaged its economy. And persuasion or contact, no, there is still back channel contacts going on. There is still contact, but Russia's position is absolutely batshit. You remember, to start peace talks, not what Russia wants in the peace talks, to even start beginning peace talks. And remember, that's not even a guarantee. To even start peace talks, Ukraine has to give up a load of territory so that Russia can occupy it. And that's not even talking about the stuff that they might even want from a potential peace deal. Anyway, so even the back channels, so vital in the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Adrianople crisis, have all apparently weakened. Well, that's not our fault. That's Russia's fault. They're the ones who started this. They're the ones whose position is crazy. Like I say, just again, not actual peace and like a peace negotiation. What they actually want to even think about giving peace talks a chance is for Ukraine to give up a vast swathe of territory. And then maybe they'll go into peace talks. So there is no evidence that Putin was ever seeking a hot war with the West. Probably not, because he just, wanted Ukraine. But now, of course, there is still the question of, what if Trump gets in? Would he then test NATO? Would he, see if, Article 5 would get triggered, if maybe they just went and blocked off the Slovakia Gap, or they went and took a border town somewhere. Not even like a full-scale war. They just did it just to destroy NATO as like a political institution, because the second someone hits Article 5 and, someone like America doesn't respond, which again, Trump has said he would not respond to Article 5 necessarily with, military force or even military aid, because, he's interpreting Article 5 very differently to how everyone else sees it. That might be what he wants. So, once again, the election is going to determine a lot of other things around the world. So, pay attention, America, please. So he continues. Let's finish this off. So he makes a very terrible mistake. He made a very terrible mistake in marching Kiev from the one which he needs to somehow be extracted. Again, best way for him to do that: Russian troops just leave Ukraine. Just Russian troops just leave Ukraine. If he wants to end this war, Russian troops just leave Ukraine. It is not that hard. But there you go. But when peacemaking is a so neglected art, when it is derided as appeasement, it is appeasement, though, because a lot of these people who are calling for peace are doing so on the proviso that Ukraine gives up an absolute load of its territory for what? To even begin peace talks? So back to this. It is depressing that a British Prime Minister should be a cheerleader for war. Is Ukraine really to be Starmer's Iraq? I could not think of a worser argument. I could not think of seeing a worser argument for this. This is an absolutely terrible piece. And quite frankly, there's some stuff in there, especially about Zelensky sending thousands of his conscripts to die. Maybe Simon should ask why all those people are dying and what they are dying for. They are dying for a free Ukraine. Or has he willingly ignored what's been happening in Ukraine for the past couple of years, where the Ukrainian people have said, we do not want to be influenced by Russia. We want to get rid of Russian influence in our country. We do not want to be part of Russia. We do not want to sign, the crazy economic agreement that, Russia was forcing on them at that time, where basically Russia would be completely in charge of Ukraine's economy, meaning they would have no say on what happens over their economy. Once again, you see someone here ignoring voices of Ukrainians, what they want, what they've been asking for, the guarantees for after this war, wanting to join NATO. I'm sorry, that's just such a terrible argument, such a terrible argument from Simon Jenkins. And I think that comment there is really, really insulting, really, really insulting. And bear in mind, once again, you should look up, what Chamberlain did, because Chamberlain gave up territory in return for peace to appease Hitler. And what happened? World War II shockingly happened. But again, every single time for over 2 years, those arguments we have covered time and time again, but people like, Simon Jenkins keep on bringing it up, keep on ignoring the answers that have been given multiple times in excruciating detail by other experts and just ignored because for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't know if Simon Jenkins will ever see this, but that's really bad, Simon. Like what you've put is really bad. And my advice to you, go speak to some Ukrainians. If you are that desperate for this war to end, go speak to some Ukrainians. Get their take on the war. Get what they are saying. Because there's very little of that actually put out into the press. Very little of that. I think you'd be doing the Ukrainians a big service if you actually went out and spoke to them and got their view of what they think was going on. But hey, So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.